Welcome, Pratique, to this supremely fascinating debriefing session. Congratulations on your 760 with a V47.
Thank you so much, DJ. Thank you so much. At the very onset, I'm going to start by saying that it's predominantly a function of your guys' coursework, to be honest, on the verbal. I know we will talk about a little bit about where I come from on the verbal skills, but going from that first 34, 35 on the first mock test to a 47 is definitely a function of how e-GMAT treats verbal as a science, and therefore gives you that confidence to, solve those questions and be comfortable with how you answered. And the moment you're comfortable with how you're answering those questions in the first couple of 4 or 5 questions, that's when you really start building on that stamina to go forward. But yeah, let's talk about this.
Yeah, well put, well put. You're like the perfect econ, right? So let me just give everybody a little bit of background as to who you are. So you have a lot of, you've done a lot of work in, the economics policy field. You have a master's in global affairs from, UFT, and you also have a degree in economics, right? So you've always had a very, very strong, I would say, quantitative background because that's what you do, but qualitative as well, because day in, day out, you're reading these tons of information and consuming it, comprehending it, and then of course translating it for the next or third person to read it. So just a disclaimer for anyone who does watch this, that you already come from a background where you're doing CR on a daily basis and RC too, right? So just a little bit, if you would like to elaborate on that bit too.
Sure. So 100%. I do come from a qualitative background, and a lot of my work is around reading. It's a lot around policy analysis, policy development. So those CR and RC skills, to a large extent, have existed in some form or the other, knowingly or unknowingly. Given that I read so much, reading is not really an issue for me. So RC was not. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I wouldn't say it was a thorn either. And CR is something that you have to get used to for sure. I mean, you might be a critical thinker, but to look at a question and solve it purposely from a critical perspective takes a little bit of readjustment. So definitely those were my stronger points, but I think it's SC that really made the difference. Because like I said, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit as well, even though verbal was a relatively stronger point for me as compared to most other folks who take it, because the amount I read for work, I was relying too much on my instincts beyond a certain point. So yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that, of course, a little bit. But let's start off with Quant, because, your Quant aptitude's good. Your first mock score was a Q46, and you eventually got a Q48 on the exam. And again, disclaimer for everybody here, you actually could not attempt all questions towards the end because you lost your internet for 5 minutes. So 5 minutes gone out of a Quant paper, and you still got a Q48. So let's talk a little bit about the courses that you did and how those kind of helped you through the Quant section on the exam.
For sure. So as like you said, I'm born, brought up in India, studied through the Indian curriculum and stuff. So Quant, the foundations were always there, but because you haven't done the kind of Quant that the GMAT expects of you in a very long time, all of this was almost brand new stuff with some hazy memory from the past. So I would say there were 3 things that really stood out for me. The word problem section was phenomenal, right? Because, and you also need to keep in mind the weightage of the word problem section in the GMAT when you're doing these questions, because that's where the most amount of work happens on your GMAT Quant, Quant questionnaire. Then number properties. It's something that it's easy in the sense that you can sit down and derive all of those number property formulae in the moment, but nobody has 3-4 minutes. I would say nobody even has more than 2.5 minutes. 2.5 is also a stretch. If you're taking more than 2 minutes on any one question on average, you're already going down the drain kind of a situation. So the number properties section, I would say the arithmetic, and then I would say the word problem section, they were 100%. The word problem specifically was a huge benefit for me because that was one, it was a refresher, and two, I think e-GMAT's word problem sections are comparatively harder as well, because they go from literally assuming you don't know anything to building up to a point where you're thinking, well, these concepts are so easy. How is the question so hard? It's one of those things. And then when you look at an actual GMAT question on, say, the favorite example I like to give is compound interest, simple interest questions, right? If you look at the questions that e-GMAT has, they're tough. Like it, and word problems even on work and work time speed kind of a thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that they make you so confident in those tougher questions that those easy questions are just 50 seconds you're out, like you're jumping to the next thing. And it's very unlikely, and that's the good part. It's only when you're hitting that 49-50 mark that you'll start seeing that one-off e-GMAT kind of a question, the hard e-GMAT kind of a question. Cementing quizzes, for instance, again, on the quant side, phenomenal, right? So I would say for quant, the word problem stood out for me. The number properties really stood out for me, not just as a refresher, but also as question pools almost, because OG at some point is too easy. I mean, that's
Yeah,
not the kind of questions you're going to get on the on sorry, the GMAT.
true, true.
Yeah, that's my spiel about your quant.
Got it. So I think this has come with a new quant architecture as well, that we've just updated this, and the expert architecture, literally you take a diagnostic, if you remember, and then the course tells you exactly what you need to do and where you're weak in. And then at the end, you can see this is how you've improved from X to Y, for example. So I think I find it very valuable as a guy who's sitting at a very high quant score. Even I would use it any given day, but yeah, coming from you again makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about your V47 now.
Right.
Again, let's put everything into context. So sitting at a V35 to start off with, high CR, high RC percentiles, you knew that something had to give with SC, right? Now, what exactly did you do with SC, and how did the SC course really help you develop that science that we spoke about at the beginning to kind of be able to solve every SC question correctly?
Right. So let's break down SC in terms of the hard questions versus the super hard questions, right? So when you're between that 600 and 700 SC type of questions, your instincts can take you only so far. Like you'd be able to hit a solid 670 or a solid 680 based on your instincts vis-a-vis the SC, right? You'll be able to look at a question and say, oh, this sounds right because I've heard it so many times. It sounds like it might be correct, and therefore I'm going to take yes, right? And that might work on a medium question, and it does. 6 out of 10 times it works, or 7 out of 10 times it works, let's say, right? It's when you start hitting those 700 questions when the value of the e-GMAT structure becomes really important. And I say that as somebody who's taken it. So when I say the value of the e-GMAT structure becomes important, I don't expect somebody who's not taken the e-GMAT to understand what I'm saying, but we'll break that down. In those 700 questions on the SC specifically, if you can break down exactly why what you instinctively think is right happens to be right, then that's the barrier to breaking that 40, 41 V score, 42 V score. So at the very foundations of the e-GMAT's SC course curriculum, they start by the very basic building blocks of what a sentence is. Like I remember when I started SC, the first video I saw was, what is a sentence? I said, well, okay. I said, let's start here. I mean, what is a sentence, right? So that's where they're starting from. And once they start building on those blocks, then they start putting in ideas such as, all right, critically analyze a sentence correction question, right? If there is, let's say, for example, if we're using a had been versus a have been, is there a sequence of events that's happening? Now, that's not something you're thinking about on a daily basis when you're doing a sentence correction question. Like sequence of events is not even, again, this is very specific to me. It's not even something that comes to mind when I'm forming sentences on my own, right? Or for example, when you're looking at those typical uses of words like such as versus like, and what's the distinguishing factor, or when that can be used, that is broken down as well. And I'm not sure, because I took the e-GMAT this year around, I'm not sure if you built up on that architecture over the past couple of years, but you go from I think every section starts you off with a pre-assessment quiz,
True.
right? And where if you think you're very good, that's a reality check right there. And then they take you through the course material, right? And then when you do the post-assessment quiz, that's when you know how much you've learned on that particular section. And I think that's very important. And then you build up on each section like that. You're starting from modifiers, and modifiers they're just a whole different beast altogether, right? And I know that now because I know how difficult it is to solve the mod. If you'd asked me this 6 months back whether I think modifiers are a problem, I would have said no, they're not. And because instinctively I'd be able to tell you how a modifier works. I couldn't. I was getting maybe 3 or 4 on 10 on a good day on those 730, 740 SC scores, SC questions. So it's that whole pre-assessment, work through what you're not good at, and then post-assessment structure that the e-GMAT brings that really helps you make it into a science, right? And also it breaks the sentence down into chunks, right? It breaks it down into, this is the context, this is the reasoning for why that context exists, and this is the conclusion of the sentence. Do they all flow together? That's the first thing. Does the meaning of the sentence make sense? Right? That's the first part. Now, if the meaning makes sense, does the grammar fit into the meaning as well? And most people I don't think like that. Like I didn't think like that. Never focused as much on the meaning of it. Just tried to. I remember the first time I saw an SC question, I kept going at the grammar. I was like, oh, is the grammar okay? And sometimes when the grammar would make sense, the meanings would not make sense, and I would be like, this is all over the place. But yes, it's the science. DJ, feel free to stop me whenever. But yeah.
No. So in fact, this has been so enjoyable to hear, because usually I'm the one talking in these interviews and the other person's listening, but you've absolutely hit SC spot on. And all of this put together makes SC such a math-like science that you know exactly why the answer is the answer. And when you get to that level, you start beginning to see that in the really, really hard questions as well, and the ambiguous ones, which of course do come on the test. So I think that's supremely important. That was very helpful. Now, in the build up to the test, and this is something that we've not really discussed a lot on, what are the things that you did in verbal to kind of get yourself prepared for the vigor of, let's say, the GMAT, because you were giving it for the first time?
Right. So I think we've talked about SC ad nauseum. So we'll talk a little bit about CR and RC. So depending on what your background is, you will always be good at some sort of reading comprehensions, and you'll be bad at some sort of reading comprehensions. In my case, I was fairly confident on the reading comprehension side from the humanities side of things. So anthropology or economics or sociology and all of that kind of stuff. If that was a part of a reading comprehension, that was great. And RCs are very interesting because one hard RC can make or break your. Well, I'm being a little too extreme, but it can take you from a 45 on a verbal to a 40 on a verbal. A 40 on a verbal is still great, but if you can hit a 45, why not? RCs are interesting because if they throw at you a concept that you've never thought about before, then you're in the middle of nowhere, you're stuck. And again, the way I went about it was I would just go on to The Economist every day, and I would read 3 or 4 science-based articles on a daily basis, right? Because science was geology, for instance, was not, it's not something that I've read about ever. I mean, or talking about the Earth's crust and how tectonic plates move and all that kind of stuff is not something that I was comfortable with.
Hmm.
And that was helpful. But then I came back to the e-GMAT. I said, all right, let me see how these guys see it, because they get students from all different backgrounds. How are they approaching the sentence correction? And the interesting part is that regardless of where you were coming from, there's this whole pre-thinking process that goes in to the reading comprehension. I think the pre-thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, the pre-thinking concept is standard, right? It's they
Correct.
use it in
Yeah.
sentence correction, they
Yeah.
use it in RC, and they use it in CR as
Correct.
well. And once you get used to that whole pre-thinking, then analyze, then answer sort of a stage, then you're not really as worried about the subject matter of the reading comprehension as you are about how it's structured, right? And again, you tend to focus on the, in my case, I was focusing on the wrong things. I was focusing too much on what the subject matter of the reading comprehension was, as opposed to what the structure is, because the GMAT doesn't expect you to be a scientist.
Yeah.
Neither does it expect you to be an economist to begin with. And the same follows for critical reasoning. I will say, however, that when you're attempting a CR or an RC question, RC, I'm not as sure about CR, don't be too worried when you're spending 3 or 4 minutes on the first question.
Yeah.
Take your time to read the reading comprehension. It's heading straight. I think the worst thing you can do is looking at the question first and then going to the reading comprehension. Like that is not going to help it, right? Because I do know that you just have about, how many minutes do we have on verbal? I think
65. Yeah, 65. 62 is quant. Yeah.
62 is quant. 65 on the verbal section, right? But you, and when you see that you spend 5 minutes or 4 minutes on just the first question, that's going to make you a little anxious, right? But you have to understand that once you read the RC well enough, then you're solving the other 4 questions that come in succession in relatively 15, 30 seconds. So on average, you're only spending about a minute and a half.
True.
So that's one thing that I would definitely keep in mind for sure.
I think you made a good point here that a lot of people usually spend lesser time on the first question and then spend 2 minutes per question on the questions after that, because they go back to reading the passage, which is absolutely wrong. It's the other way around, exactly the way you've kind of spotted it. So I think all in all, Pratik, just as a guy who's gotten a V47, what would your advice be to a person who wants to score a 760, of course? And I want you to talk about the strategic part of having a high verbal score here too, in order to kind of get to such a 99th percentile score on the GMAT.
Right. I would say, and this is not specific to verbal, I will get into to verbal. I would say the first thing that you need to analyze is what your strengths are, right? A lot of times we tend to focus on what our weaknesses are, and we tend to push very hard on our weaknesses to make sure that, if my quant is at 47, 48, I will spend far too much time on trying to get that 50, is going from a 36, 37 on verbal to a 41, 42. So if you know that you can up that verbal score or you can up that quant score, then look at where you're getting the most amount of results on that marginal work that you're doing, either for quant or for verbal. Once you figure that out, then so I would say 30% of my time was spent on quant in my GMAT preparation. I would say 70% of my time was spent on verbal, not because my verbal was weaker, but because I thought I'd be able to hit a much higher score than normal on verbal. So the first is focus on what your strengths are. And this is my philosophy. Like, this is how I go by it. Hammer hard on your comparative advantage. If you're better than most folks in one, and this is tricky for Indians because almost every Indian is better on average on quant. So then I would say you got to tweak that a little bit as well. Then you have to make sure that you're in the 41, 42 range. So focus on what your strengths are. The second is get familiarized with things that you're not used to on verbal, right? If you are very comfortable with a 600 or a 600 to 700 SC question, only start doing greater than 700 SC questions, right? Because you're not helping yourself by boosting your confidence on things that you're already good at. You know you're good at it. So start pushing beyond that 700 type of questions, right? Specifically from the e-GMAT front, it looks weird when you've been working hard and your cementing quiz gives you a 55% on a hard cementing quiz, which was my case. I got a 55 or a 60%
Yeah.
on most of my hard cementing quizzes. But there's a reason why it's considered good on the e-GMAT. Like anything above 50% on a hard cementing quiz is considered great. And I think anything above a 70% on a medium cementing quiz
It's good. Yeah.
is good as well. So don't get worried when you take those cementing quizzes and the score is lower than you would have thought. Then the third is read a lot. I mean, there is no and it can get boring to read stuff that you don't like, but that's exactly what you want to do. The GMAT's not going to throw interesting stuff at you.
Yeah.
Well, interesting to you. It might throw something out of the blue. I will say that in my case, almost all of the reading comprehensions were humanities based. And the tricky part was I thought it was too easy, which is why I thought, oh my God, I messed up because my sentence correction, I knew I'd done well. Thanks to e-GMAT, I'd already figured out. It was like a math question. I knew exactly when I was going right or wrong. It was when I started hitting the RCs when I thought, oh God, I messed up my verbal because these RCs are too easy. Which is tricky because in that sense, I was miscalculating how I was doing my things. And so that can be tricky as well. You need to know either don't assess yourself in the middle of a test, or if you are assessing yourself in the middle of the test, don't misassess, if that's a word.
True.
Because that can throw you off. But going from a 42 to a V47, I say V42 because that's what I was hitting on mocks. Going from a V42 to a V47 really is about reading those 5-6 articles a day, going through those really hard questions on e-GMAT. You will get them wrong. I mean, they're there to test those hard questions are to test you. But if you're able to get a sense of how hard those questions can be, then the GMAT is going to seem a little bit simpler. So to conclude just this part, I mean, one is to hit on your strengths. And if your strength is verbal, then focus on that.
Yeah.
Second is to familiarize yourself with concepts that you're not used. And the third is to, even if you're feeling weird or even if you're feeling anxious about, those not such great scores on the e-GMAT curriculum, still keep hitting at them because they're there to test you and they're there to make sure. If you knew everything, you wouldn't be on the e-GMAT. Let's put it like that, right? So you're just going to get used to harder questions for sure.
Got it. Sage advice, of course, I think I'm going to use this snippet for a lot of my own students that I work with. Very, very helpful again, Pratique. I can only wish you, the best for your endeavors. Please stay in touch. And thank you so much for being an e-GMAT student. And again, 760, amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'd be honest with you. When I started with the e-GMAT, the promise from e-GMAT was after I did my diagnostic test, after I put in my numbers, my first mock numbers, the e-GMAT said, we promise you'll get more than a 41. And I said, okay, that's great. That's all I need. I need a 42, 43, and I'm 42 actually, and I would have been happy because I would have been hitting a 730, 740. And I was very happy with that. I said, all right, most folks don't get that. And I'm very happy if there's a course structure that can take me from V35 to a V40, V42, 41. Midway into my e-GMAT courses, I realized that, all right, I can actually think about hitting a 44, 45, 47. I was expecting, I would not have been shocked with a 45. I was definitely surprised with the V47.
47. Yeah.
That, and I think that was partly because I was so used to very hard questions of the e-GMAT that everything seemed fairly straightforward. But yes, happy to stay in touch. Thank you guys a lot. That's
Yeah. Thanks, Pratik.
definitely, yeah.